Please be seated. So this week we go at the invitation of Thomas, as we heard last week, to the city of Jerusalem. We follow him to die. And if that sounds dramatic or melodramatic for the week ahead of us, this is actually our task. The week is about love, and love enacted in this world against power. And we know in ourselves, we have experienced it in our own lives, what happens. Not just love for those that we are charged to love, our immediate families, or even those close to us that even in our charge to love them, we cannot keep as safe as we wish, right? And those we have lost that we love. But in this world we live in, if we were to love one another, if we were to even try, then we face constantly death. So the text tells us today there's a way of the Spirit and a way of the flesh. And let's be really clear, the way of the Spirit is the way of love. And it is a death-facing love, like Jesus does today. Sort of unthinkable, but actually what we do all the time. If we imagine that justice can be in the world, we face death all the time. And the way of the flesh, to be really clear, we saw a lot of it this week, is the way of power. And I'm not making it up. It's what Paul's talking about, that there's a way that power works in the world. And it is death dealing. It is like dropping chemicals on families. It is like bombing things that bomb to make a statement about bombing. It's the dealing in power and death that is called in our text the way of the flesh. It's confusing because flesh is this thing that we all have, and so it can cause us to hate our bodies or to believe that it is us as women and men, and it is people that are the flesh. But be really clear, Paul is talking about power in the world. Power. And we all want to believe, and I definitely want to believe, that there is good power and benevolent power, and we can make peace. We can work hard to it. We can do it. But the text points to something that is true from generation to generation and is a part of what is integrated into us, what we know to be true. And it calls it out for this week. We ask you to sit with it. Can you imagine if we were made for love? Can you imagine that in the geography of this city, this broad way that we walk down, that was a path of Native Americans, that carries the history of this city in it? Can you imagine quickly the generations that have walked down the path that we have taken this morning? Every year, right? Those that have come freely and not, those that lived freely and became not free, those that thought everything in the world was possible because they had made it to this path, Mr. Washington himself at some point on this path. People outside marching and protesting not that long ago, right? For women, for people of color in this community, out there on Broadway. Can we imagine if we believed we were made to love them? Jesus does. And Jesus illustrates for us, in the ways of this world, what happens when you turn your face to the holy city and call it out for what it is meant to be. It's pretty grim stuff. I was looking for the twist, but there really isn't one for this week, is there? We know exactly what happens. Thomas says he will go to his death. He will go to his death because they tried to kill him there before. He knows exactly what he is doing. His disciples know what they're doing. Those beautiful followers that throw palms at his feet and their clothes know exactly what they are doing. Everyone risks everything to mock the power of empire that they are foolish and irrelevant in the face of, and they know it. But they stand that day in light of their own stories of liberation, people that had been freed from Egypt. That is their heritage. And they stand up just to be free for a moment, it seems. They're not stupid. They know nothing better will happen. He goes to the temple and stands on the great portico, and he knows exactly what will happen next. What if we too walked the streets of our beautiful city and stood in its holy places and stood in its places of power and said, we are called here to love, to live lives of the Spirit and not lives of the flesh. Again, it's tricky language. I think of my flesh again as soon as I say it, but it's important to say. I worked in a church once in Los Angeles with one of the guys who was pretty regular churchgoer in this church. And one of those guys that always bordered on doing something inappropriate when he was around women, like winked at the wrong time during communion or something like that. Just kind of a funny guy, but was there every week. And just didn't seem that serious, kind of lighthearted, had gone to college on the GI Bill, so had been in the war, and was partner in a huge firm, and was just successful, just a good guy. Again, always like bordering on just a little over that way, just fun. He would sit outside of the service this day on the bench and weep during it. I don't know what he saw in the war or what the story of his life was, but he would just sit outside and cry, wait for his wife. They would leave afterwards. I think sometimes it is the only response to this reading. I don't know what the point of a lot of words are. But I wonder if his weeping, like ours, is that we hear this story, which is a story of trauma, profound trauma. It is the foundational story of our tradition in many ways. This is the one. You all know it. You have brought it up for yourself every year of your life and everything that you have been through. It has walked with you, this story. It carries the weight of your life and the life of our communities. And it will only get heavier and heavier and heavier for this week. But let's remember that the core piece is that we are asked to love beyond the ways that the world permits us to love. And Jesus calls us to victory in that love. Not something other than us, not way out there. It is deep in us. We are called to our true selves as Jerusalem is called to its true self today, to be the holy city of God in this week. Right? It is who we are deep, deep, deep inside. And it has to do with how we all live collectively. And as you approach this Holy Week, as we begin it together, we do not know one another's sufferings. I hope we can be kind to each other. I don't know what it raises for you, and I learn every year anew what it will raise for me. But know that we are to be tender to one another and kind. And we are to be kind and tender in this world that insists that only power meets power. We know it's not true. Jesus rides in on a donkey today, it says. It is the victory procession of a king of peace. I don't know if you can imagine what a king of peace is in times like this. I have trouble imagining what that is, but thank God we are all here together. This is our conversation for the week and our path for the weeks and weeks to come. Is there ways to make peace and not war? You probably, like me, thought earlier this week that we might be at war by Sunday. I think some of you probably had the same thought that I did. Don't forget that that thought hovered for a moment and it was terrifying. It is not what we want for ourselves. Don't forget that we are made for love, and love will hurt. And love is the way of the Spirit, and it is for us to proclaim. And join me, and let us turn our faces to Jerusalem and follow our Lord.